Roundtable of the 2021 AUC School of Business Forum, the impact of disruption on business schools and business and management education. I am Ahmed Abdel, Associate Professor of Accounting and Associate Dean for Undergraduate Studies and Administration. So disruption is not new to education. We've seen case studies, flipped classrooms, simulations, gamification, blended learning, or even replacing chalkboards with whiteboards. These may have been considered significant changes. But the current disruption is profounder, and it's making business educators reflect very carefully on core issues such as relevance, agility, impact, and even survival. Through diverse perspectives, our panelists will share insights on how disruption affects business and management education, how to harness its power, and what it means for the future. I would like to welcome our speakers, Sharif Kamel, Dean's School of Business at the American University in Cairo, Tim Maskman, Executive Vice President and Chief Officer for Europe and the Middle East and Africa, AACSB International, Jacob Chaco, Dean College of Business, Clayton State University, Ahmed Abdel, Managing Director of Egyptian German Automotive, Jonathan Libanau, Professor and Leader in Technology Management at the London School of Economics, Ian Fenwick, Director of Sasson School of Management, David Zuga, Associate Professor of Management at the Williams College of Business, Xavier University, and President of the Africa Academy of Management, Nili Zayed, Co-founder and Director of Newton Education Services, Deborah Layton, Business School Impact System and Senior Advisor, European Foundation for Management Development, EFMD, and Amanda Line, Partner at PwC Academy, Middle East. Please be reminded that if you have any questions during the session, please write them in the Q&A box. I would first like to start by asking our speakers to shed some light on how the disruption affect the business education landscape during the past year. So I would like to start with Dean Kamel.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and welcome to our second AUC Business Forum. I hope everybody is staying safe and well. Well, November 2019 saw the sort of the break of the pandemic. The world started feeling the heat probably early 2020. It affected millions of lives and livelihoods, all walks of life. The way we communicate, the way we shop, the way we work, but also the way we study. So one of the industries that was really hit was the industry of higher education and business schools. Were obviously part of that space. What happened? Commencements were canceled, campuses were closed, budgets were cut, hiring was frozen, traveling was suspended, and that affects an extremely important element in different campuses around the world, where diversity obviously is not anymore. Because international students could not freely move from one end to the other. But even technology infrastructure was tested. In the context, for example, of AUC School of Business, we actually pride ourselves, we call ourselves Egypt's Global University, but then international students could not come on board. Were we surprised? Should we have been surprised? I don't think so. Many people think that whatever that happened suddenly, but we can also say that whatever happened was in the making for some time. Many reports actually alluded to that, but the one thing that disrupted us for many years, which is technology, on this occasion came to save the day. But I do not agree with people who believe that digital transformation started in 2020. We've been seeing digital transformation from the minute personal computers were invented in the 80s. It was accelerated in the 90s with the internet, accelerated more with mobility, and we've been seeing that growing all the time. Of course, what happened in 2020 was a leapfrog when it comes to the acceleration. Does it represent a number of challenges? Absolutely, yes. But does it open a number of opportunities? I also think so. One good thing we realized in 2020 is, unlike the rhetoric that people don't change, and actually it's very difficult for them to change, they actually changed. business schools who are naturally slow movers, institutions and universities at large, academia, they're slow movers, but they had to act fast. They had to really transform themselves in no time, with all the challenges I actually talked about. But also they needed to look at how ready they are, the changing role of the professors, because education learning is a social phenomenon. We interact with each other, we communicate with each other, we learn from each other, we learn from our professors, but also our professors learn from their students, from their reactions, and so on and so forth. All this they had to deal with. So all this, I think, answers the question, which is, what happened in the disruption in 2020? Did we learn anything so far? I think a lot. We learned more, and it was endorsed and emphasized that communication is key. That there is nothing that can replace collaboration. That flexibility and responsiveness is also very, very important. Just to conclude, I think moving forward, already business schools are revisiting their curriculum. They're looking at what things that you should focus on, learning from the experience of last year. Definitely, there is no one size that fits all. Each school has its own sort of scale and conditions and resources and so on. But the keyword I would like to leave with is adaptability is definitely the way moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean Kamel. Now let's move to another geographic location with Dean Shako.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and it is great to see you've put together such a diverse group here. So thank you for that. As my friend Sharif said, a lot of change. That is, everyone knows that. What I would like to really focus on is about the business school. What has changed with the business school? One of the biggest things we have learned as faculty administrators is that the level of engagement is most important for everyone to succeed. Student, for instance, we all thought that today everyone is on their gadgets and they're not listening to us and they're not looking at us and they're in class playing with their gadget at dining table. But that's not, yes, they are doing that, but still there was a way that we connected personally and one-on-one. Our faculty always complained, students never come to my office. But when they couldn't come to the office, things really changed. Now, I guess, one of the diversity of this panel is that I come from, we are in Atlanta, and the southern part of Atlanta, where the socioeconomic background of people are quite low. And so what we have seen is that, as always, this disruption has really affected unfairly the lower socioeconomic strata of the community. And it's not just about Comcast or some other AT&T giving free internet connection. That's not solving the issue. We prided ourselves in trying to transform students into professionals by the time they graduate. But to do it at a distance and to learn that from a distance has been the biggest disruption as far as I'm concerned. So that's been the challenge. And we are learning to be creative and innovative in engaging our students and our stakeholders. I so much agree about the fact that our faculty now move at lightning speed compared to where we were before. We used to, as we always say, our stakes are so low, we fight for everything, right? So we talked about things for years before we changed, but now I think we are getting closer to the practitioners. So that's another good thing that has come out of it. Our budgets, of course, have been cut, but again, in the US, and I don't know about others here, that has been artificially controlled as well, because we have had so many handouts from the federal government so far. I shouldn't be complaining, but the problem is that is making everyone, the faculty, the student, everyone so complacent about the fact that we can have unemployment rate of 10% and nothing will impact us. It's like the federal deficit of the United States. You know, we can keep stacking it up and the quality of life doesn't go down. But just like Sharif said, what I'm concerned about really is the long-term impact of this huge change economically, how it will affect the lower strata of the community, the inequality it brings up, etc. And I'm not talking about the political rhetoric we hear on the TV. I'm talking about real, a person who is really not a political human being. I'm talking about the life and the quality of life and the environment we live in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nchako, again, for these positive outlook. Professor Zuga, do you like to weigh in, please?
Yes. Thank you very much, Ahmed, and thank you very much, Sharif and Jacob, who went before me. I just want to point out, as they all indicated, we also experienced it over here. I remember I was a part of a group that was planning to go to France for a trip, and that trip had to be cut short, canceled, and whatever preparations we made, reversed. But for me, because of my interest, which is in academia and faculty, I'm just going to share some insight as to how we were affected. And I'm going to use the Africa Academy of Management as an example. Education, obviously, for us as an organization, it was a major issue. We were just lucky that in 2020, we had just finished our Nigeria conference, and we returned from Nigeria when the whole thing hit us. So it's, we were not administrators like Sharif and others, but still one way it has affected us is, for instance, we've had to cancel, not cancel, but move our conference, which was planned for 2022 to 2023. Because one, we are concerned about members being able to travel to the venue for the conference and what that would mean. And as a result, the way we engage each other has been affected. Some of the activities that we used to do, we used to have what we called Africa Faculty Development Workshops, and we used to go to a specific place for a week to have those workshops. This year, we can no longer do that. We've had to move it virtual. And the virtual, you don't get the same learning from the virtual as you would if it were face-to-face. To give you an example, we were planning a face-to-face as part of that conference and for a different activity altogether. And when we canceled, the organizers of that conference said, oh, you cannot move this virtual because the way this is structured, learning would not be effective in a virtual setting as if they were there face-to-face. And so this is one way this whole thing has impacted my group as a faculty or an academy of management. And we are just struggling. Some of our members who are teachers, some of our members who are administrators, when we had a webinar about them sharing their experiences of how they were affected. As Sharif indicated earlier on, in Ghana, for example, some administrators had difficulty because the students did not have the infrastructure to attend the classes. They just could not. It's not that they were not interested, but they could not. One, electricity was the problem because you had lights off. Two, the technology wasn't there, and the telecommunication organizations had to come in to help them to be able to function. So from an academic standpoint, our members were affected in terms of their ability to deliver the services, and also in terms of them engaging themselves in the learning and interacting and collaborating with their colleagues. Thank you very much. That's what I wanted to share from my perspective.
Thank you very much, Professor Zuga. I mean, I'm hearing communication, collaboration, engagement, and definitely IT infrastructure. Please, Professor Libanow, can you please shed some light on how disruption affected the business education landscape?
Thank you. Around 10 months ago, there was a lot of discussion about how our experience was going to transform us, and in particular, that we would rediscover kindness and cooperation, that we would be more of forward-thinking and optimistic people when we come through all of this. And I'm afraid I'm not by inclination a great optimist, and so I began thinking more carefully about how my experiences and those of the universities was in reality facing what we were doing. And in general, I think we did a good job, but I'd like to make 4 points, which I think are a bit divergent from some of the discussion so far. First of all, I disagree that there's any evidence of disruption in the sense of Christensen's innovation theory. Now, this may seem like a pedantic concern from someone who teaches innovation theory, but let's call it disturbance, because disruption theory, I'm sorry, Christensen hijacked that term. It's a perfectly usable term, but he's made it a jargon term which doesn't fit our experience here. We're experiencing disruption, and we shouldn't expect the theory's projected trajectory to have much relevance to what we're going to have to overcome in working through this disturbance. That's important because it addresses some of what we might want to do in predicting what's coming next. I'm optimistic, at least in the sense that I don't believe this is the kind of disruption which puts our sector at risk. Now, I'll come back to that concept maybe in the next session of the workshop. The second point is that just as with e-commerce and streaming entertainment and the adaptation of social media tools like group chats and informational videos and things like that, we do see a displacement of long-term trends, and Kamal mentioned this, but these are long-standing trends of around 15 years or so. We're seeing the curve bumped up on the scale, but it's not necessarily going to rise at a faster growth rate. So we'll see likely the curves return to the slope that we became familiar with. So yes, it will in that sense push us further along towards a higher proportion of the population adopting e-commerce and online learning practices and things like that, but those were growing for a long time anyway, and will return to that rate of growth. It'll bring us to saturation sooner, but not in a way which is highly transformative. The third point is that we have seen a lot of experimentation. This is what heartens most of all. We've seen a lot of experimentation. We haven't seen as much learning from those experiments as we've seen in the number of experiments, but we've seen some learning from experimentation, and I wish we could see more. There's been a lot of sharing of best practice, and I think that that's something that's impressed us all. We see that as a nice result of cooperative spirit among colleagues. So best practice, I think, we can talk about in a knowledgeable way because it's been shared better than many of our previous experiences of professionals in this sector. There's been a lot of evidence of emergency solidarity. So rather than transformation of humanity, we do see solidarity, but at least I would limit my claims to the context of the emergency. I hope to learn that there's more of that going on. One more final point. There's a lot of new research on COVID-related themes, and even I have dug in and done some of this, and will continue. For the most part, as in my case, it's taking up research methods or topical interests that are long-standing, and then turning them to something which looks much more relevant to what I call, in this case, not COVID so much as the health emergency application, so that it'll have some longevity. There have been teaching examples that have been good, and I think that we will continue to use those teaching examples until the next catastrophe comes along and makes it look like it's much more important to form our courses around that rather than the previous one. Some institutions are better at adapting to that than others. I was teaching at Columbia University during 9/11, which was also around the time that the Enron scandal occurred. And that affected my teaching a whole lot. When I returned from my visiting professorship to the LSE, nobody was teaching either Enron or business interruption theory at LSE, but that's a difference in the kind of institutions. I think we are going to be using much more of the teaching transformation in our experiences. And the most important part of that is testing old theories against our now highly self-conscious experiences. And I think that we can go through a list of sort of standard management theories that we drag out for our first lessons, and think about them a bit anew, because they do have to stand up to the experiences that businesses have been so self-conscious of and have been so aware of as a sectoral problem. So I'll leave my remarks at the outset here. I'm going to return to some of these when I get a chance in the next session.
Thank you very much, Professor Libinaw, and thank you for highlighting actually the roles that business schools actually play beyond education and being a part of the community. So we covered the perspective from the US, from Africa and the Middle East, and from Europe. Now we go to another continent, Asia, and I'd like to invite Dean Fenwick.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So I'm at Sassoon School of Management in Bangkok, and everything affected us a little differently. So our school was founded just over 39 years ago in conjunction with Wharton and Kellogg and Chulalongkorn University here in Bangkok. And initially we used all visiting faculty, and we still use about 60% visiting faculty. And the whole program is geared towards that, around 4-week modules, visiting faculty friendly, and then boom, all the pandemic barriers to travel went up. And so we had to scramble to find substitutes for the talented business educators we had before. But fortunately, we found there were a lot in Thailand and in adjacent countries, many of them teaching in China or in Hong Kong or in Singapore, but living in Thailand. And the only hardship we really had was we had to keep readjusting. As different countries opened and closed, people would have to drop out and we would have to find substitutes. The other big change for us was our starting date. So somewhat strangely, we used to start in April. And of course, April 2020 was not a good time to start. So every day students were withdrawing, postponing, deferring their acceptance. And so we moved the start date to July. And we were still not confident we would be able to start in July 2020 face-to-face. So we started with blended learning. And I think this has been the big learning for us. Sorry, we found that we can introduce innovations under the guise, if you like, of dealing with the pandemic. And it's been very successful. So we have introduced blended learning. We've changed our start date. And in that blended learning course that opened our program, we focused on skills and values, which was a great time to make the soft skills, if you like, the smart skills, as we call them, equal to the quantitative skills. So instead of starting with stats and math and accounting, we started with purpose, values, mindfulness, and how do you become a leader in a time of adversity. And it kind of all fitted together. Another headache for us has been our Kellogg residential. So for our executive MBA students, one of the highlights is a 2-week sojourn at Kellogg. Of course, that was scheduled originally for March 2020 for the executives, and that soon got moved to November 2020. And that then got moved to March 2021. And right now it's been moved to June 2022. And so again, we had to scramble to replace those courses with our own courses so people could graduate in a timely fashion. And we've got to scramble in 2022 to get essentially 3 cohorts of people through that residential. But, you know, I think we've learned a lot. I think we've found a lot of flexibility that we didn't think we had. And overall, I think we've improved in our situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean Fenwick. I mean, you highlight another perspective, which is resources and how we actually deploy them in this under these conditions, but also that this basically enhanced flexibility and agility. You know, academic institutions are not as flexible as other types of institutions, and I think this pandemic, actually, and this disruption increase that flexibility. Thank you very much. Now, business and management education goes beyond the business schools. There are definitely other partners which play a very important complementary and synergetic roles. A group of these players are accrediting bodies and educational assessors. So I'd like to go to Professor Maskman to share his thoughts, please. Tim?
I thought this was going to be the first time, Ahmed, that someone didn't have to say you're on mute, so I apologize. Such a pleasure to be with you and Dean Kamal again at AUC. David, the last time, not too long ago, we were all at AUC for an African Academy of Management faculty development workshop. So may we be there again in the future. And to my old friend Jacob, I'm old. You're not old. It's great to see you again. Just a couple of comments to add on to the rich discussion, if I might, Ahmed. I was on a call yesterday with the dean at the Open University in the UK. And now, why do I mention the Open U? It was because over 60 years ago, the Open U opened its doors to provide education to what we called at the time non-traditional students. And of course, it wasn't digital at the time. They leveraged the existing technology, which was exclusively controlled by the Post in the UK, and engage working students who simply couldn't come to our institutions, to our business schools during the day or regularly in the evening. Fast forward today, we were laughing because over the last almost 12 months now, the world has become much more agile in virtual platforms, and there has in fact been disruption in ways that no one would have foreseen. We have member schools in the Gulf, for example, in countries where digital virtual delivery was in fact forbidden until COVID. And in that case, even the country and the Ministry of Education flipped and were able to change institutionally historical policies and allow distance learning. And so, as has been said, I've been so impressed globally with the responsiveness in different ways at different levels of speed to this challenge of the global pandemic. We're seeing now schools that have demonstrated resourcefulness, resilience, agility in a sector, higher education, that for well close to 1,000 years has been somewhat stable, and in many components resistant to change. But in these last 11 months, we've seen remarkable flexibility, if you will, and responses to the needs of different consumers. But let us not forget, and my friend Jacob raised this issue, we have a member school in Liberia, in Africa, for example, that is still struggling with reaching their students because of challenges to bandwidth, both in the country and access by students, many of whom live with families in remote villages, incredibly complicated. So while we have great stories to tell for many of our institutions across the 101 countries or territories where our members reside, some still struggle mightily and need our support and assistance, and in very profoundly direct ways. So, Ahmed, I've been, as I mentioned, very proud of the way members have responded. It's been uneven, but huge trajectory on the learning curve in terms of embracing technology, and that will lead for a very fertile discussion as we move on with this group, is in terms of determining, well, are these permanent changes or what in fact is next? So again, a great honor for me to be with you today.
Thank you very much, Tim, and thank you for another optimistic view. And you mentioned how this is changing things like regulatory frameworks and policy making in certain countries, things that would have been very difficult under normal circumstances. So I'd like to go to Professor Leighton, and how the educational ecosystem is being affected. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to take part in this session. I have just had a notice to say my internet connection is unstable, so in the best traditions of these meetings, the timing is perfect. So as with the previous speaker, EFMD Global is a membership organisation of business schools across the world. And at EFMD Global, we have a continuous improvement tool called Business School Impact System, which AUC Business School has been recognised along with 52 other business schools. We decided to conduct a survey of 900 business schools across the world to find out exactly what the disruption had meant to business schools. We had 114 responses, and this was back in November. So this has given us some really good insights into this question that you're asking today. So we use the dimensions of the Business School Impact System tool in order to investigate the disruption. So these dimensions are financial impact, educational impact, economic and business development, intellectual impact, regional business ecosystem, societal and image impact. So we looked at all of these aspects in the survey. The most significant impacts that deans told us had affected them so far have been on business school revenue. So this speaks to Dean Kamel's point at the very beginning, and also student numbers. So almost half of our sample said that their revenue had fallen, and a third said that their student numbers had fallen. Most significantly in executive education, where private business schools reported up to 46% fall in executive education students. So that was particularly significant. Ongoing pressure on student fees, as students may perceive that they're getting something different and arguably cheaper than they're actually getting with remote delivery. And also employability opportunities had been impacted undoubtedly for students. We asked them what the key internal challenges were for them as business schools. And you might not be surprised to learn that these were around adjusting to remote learning. And that's a combination of meeting and adjusting to student expectations of what remote learning looks like, and also of the new learning environment. So aligning faculty skills with new forms of delivery, and of course the investments in the technologies required, particularly mobile first technologies, to overcome some of the issues of accessibility. Two of the speakers have already spoken about problems with access to learning for students, not just with Wi-Fi access and technology access, but also in terms of their living environment and their ability to engage in much of the remote delivery. But that also applies to staff. So there were also faculty issues there. Where students were allowed to come onto campus, there were often challenges around ensuring a COVID-safe campus, and what that meant, particularly for students from different parts of the world. So those were the internal challenges. We then asked them about the external challenges, and they told us that the disruption had really caused a major challenge for them in terms of international student recruitment. And this was around the admissions of new students, but also student mobility, as travel restrictions and quarantine requirements were really very unclear and very difficult often to find out about. They'd also impacted student placements, summer schools, study visits, as we've heard. And the second greatest external challenge that they identified was around government higher education policy and specific requirements connected to sudden campus closures, which we've seen in the last week in parts of Europe, for example, and new operating requirements. So in summary, some very significant disruption deans are telling us across the sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Maskman. So, of course, another important partner of business schools is the business community at large. After all, we are schools of business. So I'd like to switch to the business part, and we'll start with Dr. Abdel.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed. I stand on the fence on both sides because yes, I am in the business, but I also taught for about 15 years at the AUC, mainly in the areas of operations management and production and quantitative methods and what have you. Ironically, back in 2014, the AUC asked me to give a talk at the EFMD conference in Marrakesh in 2014 about how can business schools in the MENA region become more competitive. And at that point of time, there was the start of a talk about schools that are not made of bricks and mortar and digital transformation. And it is interesting to see how this, if I may call it the crisis, has led to the acceleration of digital transformation in everything we do. And I think this will last for at least for the next 2 to 3 years, and the impact of which will be felt for many years to come. But let me, from a business perspective and how it reflects on what we teach in schools of business, let me take 3 or 4 points that I think are worth noting, and they will have an impact on curricula. And we can talk about this more in the session. One is the supply chains have been disrupted, and the disruption that has happened to supply chains has made many of the things that we used to teach. I work in the automotive industry. Just in time was the thing that we talked about most of the time, how to lower your inventory. Now we talk about just in case. We talk about how resilient your supply chains are. And it's a complete change of the mindset. And I will talk about this a little bit more. Another thing that we're seeing is the acceleration of the adoption of the fourth industrial revolution. Klaus Schwab came up with this notion in 2016, I think, and people have been talking about the impact of the fourth industrial revolution even before that. But even in a country like Egypt, I now see a lot of people talking about the adoption of elements of the fourth industrial revolution in factories, in industrial parks. And so the uptake of these technologies is happening, and I think more of it will happen in years to come. And we need to, in business schools, to address such concepts. A point that has been talked about quite a lot from the previous speakers is collaboration, sharing of best practices, which brings about a very important issue, and that is the security of what we're doing digitally. And that in itself is something that needs to be kept in mind when we talk about curriculums in schools of business. The last point that I would like to talk about, and that is, I'm seeing a clear trend that certification for graduates is getting more and more to be done by companies, the likes of, I think Dean Cameron spoke about this earlier in the discussion, but companies like Google, Amazon are giving certificates now, and people go into the workforce to work in the marketplace with certificates given by such companies. Now that brings up another very important point, which is what happens to the accreditation and how do we go about accreditation of schools of business. So these are some of the points. I think in our further discussion, I'll talk a little bit more about how to deal with these in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Abdel, and definitely it's great that you have both the academic and practical side. So that's a very comprehensive view. I'd like to hear from Ms. Line and another practitioner, a Big Four, but also that operates an education and training operation. So Ms. Line, can you please share your thoughts?
Thank you very much. And again, thank you for inviting me to be here. I think there are advantages and disadvantages to being towards the end of the panel. The advantages, I'm going to agree with everything that my eminent panelists, co-panelists have said. And of course, the challenge is that there's not
No.
Education and training academy within that practice. but the vast majority of the work
I think this line has been connected. So until she can rejoin, Nelly, can you want to share some thoughts?
Sure. Thank you, Ahmed. It's a pleasure to be part of this wonderful panel. And as an AUC, and it's always an honor to be back at AUC, even if virtually. I'll borrow a page from Ms. Lyon's book and say that I agree with everything that's been said so far, since I come at the very end of this very rich conversation. I would like to start by saying that prior to the pandemic, I don't know, would you like to, I think Ms. Lyon is back, would you like her to continue, or would
sure.
you like, it's up to you.
No, go ahead, Nelly, and we can go get.
Okay, sure. So what I was saying is that even prior to the pandemic and the situation we are in today, business schools were already facing challenges and trying to keep up with the changing landscape of the economy and the business world, like many of the speakers before earlier said. I remember being on a roundtable at this forum last year with Dean Kamel discussing the future of business education. And little did we know that the future was coming so soon. There was a conversation about the role of technology, a conversation about MBA applications seeing a decrease worldwide. There were questions about the relevance of what was being taught. Now, post or while we're still in the middle of COVID-19, I think relevance is the name of the game. We saw that once business schools were over the initial shock of going online and shutting down physical campuses, many began offering courses and workshops in leadership at times of crisis, leadership during the pandemic, risks management, etc. Because this is what now mattered to students and business leaders. I think it was Dr. Leighton earlier who said we see students now going on tuition strikes, arguing that they're not getting value for money. At Newton, part of what we do is we advise students on how to apply to universities. We see programs going 100% online. We see business schools waiving the GMAT, for instance, as an admissions requirement. It suddenly doesn't matter anymore. This was one big taboo for many decades. So we now have to come up, or admissions offices have to come up with new criteria, or again, relevant criteria to find out who are good fit students. We see a shift, or maybe perhaps a clearer shift in student interests. And I would argue that this is again due to relevance. There's a shift towards areas such as fintech, digital finance, now public health, the sciences, where the pharmaceutical world meets the business world, logistics. Like Professor Abdel said, supply chain management. Here we are trying to vaccinate the whole planet. How are we going to do this? So these areas that seem to be, on the periphery of the business education world sometimes, or maybe not there at all, or in silos, are now converging together to come under, the umbrella of business education. And I think it's a great opportunity for business schools to bring those areas together. We also at Newton work in scholarship management, and so we see scholarship providers refuse, or at best hesitate, to fund online education, where tuition costs just as much as it does in face-to-face programs. So people are skeptical about that. Do they want to fund students to sit at home in front of their laptops? So that's one thing we're dealing with. I will just leave you with, just a word of caution that we need to be careful as we draw our conclusions, because this crisis is not behind us yet. We are still growing through it. And so there may be more surprises, or like Professor Libano says, more disturbances coming our way. So I'll leave you with that, and I look forward to the rest of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nelly. I mean, you raise important points as the shift in actually even the focus or the demand for certain majors and certain degrees. And again, back to the issue of agility and flexibility in terms of admission. So thank you very much for these comments. Back to Amanda. I think she. Yes, great, perfect, excellent timing. Amanda, can you hear us?
Yes, I
Yes.
can. I'm so sorry. It's absolutely classic.
No, that's okay.
Isn't it?
It's a session on disrupting anyway, so that's very relevant.
I'm now hotspotting off my phone. Exactly, hotspotting off my phone. So it is now telling me that this connection is unstable. So anyway, as I was saying, so we're basically in we're in the field of executive education. We help our clients, large corporates, governments, upskill, develop their talent, as well as training our own people. And we train a lot of individuals who come to us to join in the classes that we offer for our own students. So there are three things I'd like to say about the market disruption that we had. The first was that our clients, so the corporates and the governments, basically stopped training when COVID hit. The uncertainty around how to do that, the uncertainty around or the difficulties in flipping for them to an online situation meant they stopped training. And that, I think, has been a major disruption economically, as well as in terms of the corporates themselves. PwC just collaborated with the World Economic Forum to publish this report in January, which is difficult to see. It's entitled Upskilling for Shared Prosperity. And basically what it says is that upskilling is key to economic recovery. So the fact that governments and corporates have scaled back on their training, because, and this, I'm talking about the Middle East region here, although it does apply globally too, it is a challenge for economic recovery. Individuals, to pick up on a point that one of my co-panelists just made, certifications are becoming much, much more important. So I take the products of business schools into PwC and into our clients, and they are now looking for certifications to shore up their skill base, to give them additional credibility, be that in finance, tax, HR, risk, leadership, whatever it is. So I think one of the other panelists made that point too. I think from a provider point of view, the biggest disruption was the need to flip online to online delivery, which luckily, because PwC is fairly mature in terms of its digital capabilities, we were able to do very quickly. So that wasn't a challenge for us, and in fact became an opportunity, because what a lot of our clients were struggling with was their own digital capability. So we used our digital to train them on how to work from home. So I think one of the opportunities that's come out of this disruption is an opportunity to get in with our clients, governments, corporates, to upskill their people around the whole digital suite. That has become an imperative. How can you work effectively these days if you are not digitally literate? I think the challenge, and again, I refer back to something that somebody said earlier on, and that is around engagement. So I think the major challenge for us has been how in a virtual world do you really make sure people learn? And in order to learn, you have to be engaged, and that is inevitably more challenging in a virtual environment. And I think that is the challenge that we continue to struggle with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Amanda. And that's actually an excellent segue for our next segment, which we'll talk about. So basically, there is always this negative connotation about disruption, but definitely there's also a silver lining. So I'd like to get some very quick reactions on what makes education institutions more resilient to negative shocks and also more receptive of opportunities. So we'll go back to Professor Maskman.
Thanks for the question, Ahmed. You know, there's a maxim that says change is the norm, not the exception. And I think even in our world of higher ed, we've acknowledged that, we've embraced that, and we're seeing the responses now dramatically impact the global world of learning. Let me say first on this optimistic front, that is COVID, as we see COVID in the rearview mirror, student mobility, travel, international enrollments will roar back. I think there's no question about that, stronger than it's ever been. And countries that have risked mobility with certain political decisions, and that's the US and the UK, have acknowledged and will right their ships and become major players again in this global universe. We've seen, Ahmed, and we just finished a big project with study portals, have seen during these challenging times that interest among students internationally in entrepreneurship has spiked dramatically. That all of a sudden, and I've spent most of my academic life in the entrepreneurship arena, but today there's a dramatic spike, and I think it's to leverage the technology platform. As a result, with the Global Business School Network, with GBSN and Stanford Seed at the Graduate School of Business at Stanford, we're hosting a Pan-African entrepreneurship competition for students early in the spring of this year to take advantage of this, and very, very excited about this as well. I will second the emphasis, if you will, on the evolution of credentials. Our schools are evolving their curriculum to include the world of stackable credentials, certificates, some in the exec ed arena, some being you can port for degree programs. Learners, we used to call students, will come in and out of our business schools for what they need around certain competencies. And if we can't provide it as business educators, it will be provided by businesses themselves, whatever those expectations are. We're going to see much more focus on personalized learning, customized learning at the individual level, and technology is going to allow us to do that. Programmatically, courses, modules will be shorter, faster, more intensive, and I think this is going to be the way of the world moving forward. Finally, one of the most interesting initiatives I've seen in the last year are what companies like Handshake are doing in the virtual internship space globally. So they've jumped into these opportunities. Bright, ambitious students don't have to travel. Companies travel with their projects, with their challenges, and bring them to these students. And so it's opened up incredible opportunities globally, and I think we're going to see more and more of this, Ahmed, in the foreseeable future.
Thank you very much, Tim. Professor Zuga, any thoughts on the resilience and ability to capture opportunities?
Yes. Thank you very much, Ahmed, again. I think there are. The Foresight Africa 2020, for example, when they came up with their report, even though the table of content did not include education, somewhere on page 7, they pointed out that there are significant opportunities for digital acceleration in the key sectors of education, education being one of them. So as a service which business schools offer, that service is relatively easily adaptable. And that means that it can kind of be resilient to negative shocks. And for instance, in some places like here, my school had to, our admissions, for example, were at a certain percentage, very low, but COVID has rather increased or helped us to increase our admissions. In other words, we have taken advantage of COVID to grow, so to speak. Regarding opportunities, I think in Africa and other places, one school in Ghana, for example, just basically used the COVID experience to increase their digitization acceleration. I mean, their digitization in the classroom, such that things they couldn't do before, things they were planning to do in 15 years, now they have had to do it within 1 year. They had support from other places, but it still made them do it quicker and faster. And they are trying to take advantage of those things. And it's all because of COVID. So the opportunities, I would say, for business schools, we, AFAM, Africa Academy of Management, we took advantage of COVID to also become innovative and to establish what we call webinars that we are now going to offer as substitute for our conferences. So those are some areas that I see being able to take advantage of some opportunities presented by COVID. Thank you
very much. Thank you very much, Professor Zuga. Dean Fenwick.
Hi. So I think resilience, a lot of people think of resilience as bouncing back. I think it's more than that. Resilience is about bouncing up. So it's coming back better than you were before, better suited to the new environment. And I think there's three things that lie behind that. One is entrepreneurial mindset, the ability to look at situations and see opportunities that others don't see, the ability to try new things quickly and not be too upset when they fail and just pick up and try again. And then when something works, the ability to scale that up and roll it out quickly. That's one thing, entrepreneurial mindset. The other thing which I'm starting to realize is extremely important is diversity. The more diverse our faculty, the more diverse the staff, the more diverse the programs, the more chance there is that there's something in there that's going to work. And so I think we've got to foster more diversity, and that will help us with the entrepreneurial mindset. The final thing I always say is permission or enabling. The structure of the organization has got to encourage people to speak out, encourage them to suggest wild things and to try them out. And of course, then to put up with them when they fail. Without that, I don't think you can have resilience. So entrepreneurial mindset, diversity, permission. That's what I think.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Dean Chaco. Jacob?
Okay, I got caught for the muting part. Sorry about that. I agree we are more resilient because I think what is critical in my mind is how nimble we have become. We were so, as a sector, things took forever to change. And I think now we feel that it can change and it is okay to change. So that's a great thing, at least from an administrative point of view. We are more innovative in the sense that we are embracing new things in terms of teaching, in terms of engaging and recruiting, even graduating students. And not that we don't love one-to-one interaction, but we are being creative. I think several of my colleagues here have said that online education has become more legitimate, and that is important because, Tim mentioned about Open University, and for the longest time, as we all know, people did not accept it. And I used to live in the UAE. Online education in the UAE was they just didn't want to talk about it. That was inferior. And that is the case in most of the rest of the world. And that has become more legitimate. And that gives us more opportunity. Going back to what Ian was talking about, that gives us the opportunity to get more diverse faculty from around the world, at least on a hybrid or a hybrid format, get more faculty involved in teaching, co-teaching, team teaching, etc., which that distance has gone, at least for now. But on the other hand, the scary part is, again, I think one of the speakers, a speaker mentioned about the pace of change toward accepting the realities of the fourth industrial revolution means that the pace of change toward the unknown and how we prepare our students have also accelerated, which means we are already talking about what should we be teaching our students to prepare for the future. Now we have to really figure out that very quickly. And so I truly hope from what Jonathan was talking about, the great habit of sharing best practices continue, because nobody has all the answers, but together we'll have better answers. So I'm overall, I'm more, cautiously optimistic, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chaco. I know that the general vibe here is optimism, so which is very good. Professor Liebenauer.
Thank you. So I've been reflecting on this question about resilience, and I was turning my mind more to what I preferred rather than necessarily what I observed. But I'd like to make 3 points. The first of them follows on from what Tim, Jacob, Ian have been saying about change and experimentation in particular. And whereas I am not very happy with our history of coping with change, I do think that education should be experimental. It's a normative position I take. I really think that we ought to be risk takers, and we ought to have better understanding about what gambles we're taking. We ought to do better about having an attitude of tolerating failure. I think Ian said that also, reflecting things that Tim said too. We get pushed around by things like league tables. And I'm speaking as one from, well, we're never on top of the league table. We're always second to Harvard in social sciences. But, I think league tables are terrible as a beneficiary of them, because they push us to short-term thinking and inability to really try out things, take risks, tolerate failure for a while so that we can recalibrate. So education should be experimental. We're not experimental enough. And I'm hoping the kind of push that we've been into off balance now has changed our attitude a bit like that. The second is that education is often counter-cyclical with the economy, and we better be more able to accommodate and exploit that. And that's a straight statement of strategy. We have a lot of evidence of that, and I'll tell you about what's happened at the LSE that emphasizes counter-cyclicality in very strange ways. But in order to do that, we need to be better at saving for a rainy day, and to make sure that we can look after our own interests and the broader societal interests in a way that accommodates our needs independent of the cyclicality of the economy, and then we can better understand what happens when we encounter a downturn like the one we're experiencing now. The third point I'd like to make comes from these two, which is, and I also was interested in Deborah Layton's points, that a consequence of both the current emergency and of the cyclicality is likely to be a continuing hollowing out of the middle. So elite institutions like the London School of Economics are enhanced, mirroring what happens in the social groups more widely in society. As a result of COVID, we see this expanding gap in social welfare. The system as a whole, I think, will not shrink. That's why I also don't believe that we're being disrupted in the sense that management education is going to fall off its perch because of this. But it will force the middle ground to recalibrate in a number of things. These include price and other signaling activities such as local and regional virtues, right? So it could mean shifting aspirations, including for academic staff. And I think if we disaggregate Deborah Layton's data, we may find already evidence of this kind of hollowing out of the middle. In the case of the LSE, yesterday afternoon, I got an interim report from our graduate admission.
Jonathan? He dropped. Professor Jonathan would, Professor Griebenow will be joining us again. Common themes of all of this is basically that this disruption is really a catalyst for change. Diversity is key. Changing not just the processes, but also the structure of academic institutions will enhance the resilience and also experimentation in these institutions. I'd like to move to another part, which is basically focusing more on the future. And there was already a previous session in this forum that talks about the future of work. And I know Dean Kamel mentioned that the future of work is closely related to the future of learning and the future of education. So my question is that, how do you see the future of business education? And I'll start with Ms. Line.
Thank you. Jacob, you said you're cautiously optimistic. I'm just going to go with optimistic. Okay, I think we have an optimistic future as long as, and I think this is picking up on something I think I might have heard Nelly say when I was trying to get my connection back, that as long as the learning is relevant, because I think it has to be related to the skills that people need to progress their careers within the workplace. So it has to be relevant learning. I think, of course, we're going to be in a world of blended learning, whatever balance that falls between what we do in the classroom and what we do online. But I also think there will be very much a flight to quality, because let's be honest, there's been a lot of very bad online learning out there. And some of our children have experienced that at school. So I think people are now much more careful before they sign up for an online course to understand really, what is the quality of that course. So I think a flight to quality, and I come back to the point, I'm going to repeat almost everything Tim said now around certifications, be that a digital badge, or a war-worthy certificate. But I think certifications are going to be important, hopefully internationally recognized. I think personalized learning, so adaptive learning, people are going to want to spend a very efficient amount of time learning. So it's going to be a sprint, not a marathon. And so the learning needs to be very much personalized to them. So I think adaptive learning will have its place. And I come back to engagement, because in order for learning to be effective, it's got to be engagement. So I think one of the challenges we have as providers of education is, how do we ensure the effectiveness of that learning? How do we ensure engagement in a virtual world? And for that reason, I don't think learning is going to be purely virtual. I do not think that the classroom is dead.
Okay. That's good to hear. Thank you very much, Amanda. Dr. Abdel.
I'll pick up on the point that learning is not going to be just virtual. I do agree. It will be a blended, I think, because we still need this interaction. But let me in answer to the future of business schools, let me mirror what I have said as challenges to the business world and actually to the market that we cater to from a business school perspective. Two things: the mindset, and I think these are themes that we all agree on: resilience, agility, importance of digital transformation, and a very important part that is managing uncertainty. We've always been teaching in business schools how to deal with uncertainty. Well, I think this situation that we're in puts further emphasis on that. Skills needed, training in innovation, working in teams, importance of artificial intelligence. It is cutting across all disciplines within the schools of business, be it finance, accounting, and what have you, and systems analysis. And being an operations research guy, I always say systems analysis has always been there, and I think will continue to be there for years to come. That's my take on the future of how curriculums should reflect what's happening in the business world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deborah?
So without repeating much of what has been said before, the two overwhelming things came out of the survey about the future. One was the need for business schools to reconsider their business models. And this was thought by 96% of respondents to be either likely or highly likely. And that the consequence of this would be disruptive change. They thought that as partly as a consequence of this, 90% of respondents again thought that business schools were either likely or highly likely to do things very differently in the future. They didn't agree that certification was likely to be significant, but maybe that's just business school deans kidding themselves because it's a threat to their business, potentially. The mass introduction of remote and digital learning, of course, they thought was important. But one thing that hasn't been mentioned was competition between business schools. So 90% of respondents again thought that there would be increased competition between business schools and that this would cause some business schools to disappear, but would also lead to some very interesting new forms of collaboration and partnership, not just with commercial partners, but with other business schools and other providers. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Nelly, how do you see the future of business education?
Okay, unmute first. Yeah, I guess, you know, this panel is in so much harmony. I want to re-echo everything that's been already said. I think I agree with all that my colleagues have said about the changes that are to come to business schools. Like I said earlier, I'm sure there will be changes in admissions requirements. I'm not sure what will happen to tuition, but something needs to happen there because people are not currently satisfied. The mode of learning, I agree with Amanda that I don't think the classroom will disappear. I don't hope, as a mother, you know, of two children who are now being online schooled, I don't wish this upon any family anywhere in the world. So I think there will be some version of blended learning, definitely more personalized, more customized, like Dr. Maskman was saying earlier. I attended the part of the roundtable with the students yesterday at the forum, and I think every one of them said they want to become an entrepreneur. And it's interesting, that this is what they think they want to be. I don't know if this is what that's not what they will end up doing. And this is also another role of business schools. We need to educate people about what is it, you know, what is entrepreneurship? Is this what you really want to do? Is it because it's become the aspiration and the goal of many young people today. A fun fact that I came across was that 2021, this year, marks the 100-year anniversary of the first written case study. And the case study method, that we are all familiar with is so ubiquitous across business schools. It's how a lot of business schools teach business. And that's also something I think about what will happen with the way we teach, whether it's online or physical. Are case studies still relevant with all the changes that are happening? Are they meaningful anymore? Should they just disappear or adapt and change in a different way? So with that, I'll just hand it over to you, Ahmed, and thank you so much for this great panel.
Thank you very much, Nidhi. Thank you. Dean Kamel.
Thank you. So I'll say I'll agree with my colleagues and add just a couple of more thoughts. Well, the cost of no action will be much greater than the cost of action, even if we take wrong decisions. But I think we all said that the future will definitely have a bit of a blended learning. Again, I agree with Amanda, and I'm tilted more towards what Amanda said versus what Jacob said. I'm optimistic, a little bit cautious, but I'm still optimistic. The leaders of tomorrow that we help develop and create, they have to be accustomed to additional skills that you all actually mentioned. And I'll just pinpoint on a number of elements, including being visionary, being progressive, being entrepreneurial. I mean, we teach entrepreneurship day in, day out, but let's just practice what we preach and the fact how we run the business school. I've always said I like to believe that I'm the CEO of an intellectual enterprise. Am I? I'm not sure, but we need to act that way. We need to be quick. We need to be flexible. We need to be responsible, but you also need to be resourceful, and we need to be ambitious. And I did not use the agility, resilience. You've already covered all that. By doing that, I believe that business schools have an opportune moment to become learning hubs. But we will still, in the coming future, learn as we go. We've already learned that the past year. We didn't have a manual, we didn't go through a script, but we learn as we go. And I think we'll continue to do that. And what I mean by we is actually faculty and staff, maybe even more than students, because students are extremely smart these days with those gadgets being digital natives and the like. We've already covered the part about customization. I think more collaboration will be key, so we can collectively co-create a new look learning environment that really has diversity in it, and diversity will never come without extensive collaboration. We've talked about the fourth industrial revolution repeatedly, but I also think we're going through a fourth phase of business education. So we started like what, 100 plus years ago with the paperwork, with the case studies Nelly was just mentioning, and then we moved on to the sort of the computer-based. And then we moved to the internet, sort of pushed. And now we're into a phase that has digital applications really at the core. So are we going to see in the future, like in the financial sector, non-financial institutions offering financial services like fintechs? Are we going to see that in the education sector? We have the term edtech today, but that's a connotation for something else. Are we going to see non-academic institution offering academic programs? I don't know. Maybe I don't wish for that. I don't know about that. But what I know of is that we've moved from paperwork to computer-based and simulation and so on to blended to something I personally cannot figure out what it is today and how it's going to be changing moving forward. One thing I know for sure is that not the biggest business school, nor the smallest business school, nor the quickest business school, but it's the most adaptive business school, the most responsive business school is the one that we be able to offer its students and its community the service that can help its graduate to go out there and make a difference in society. So if I have to summarize the future in one sentence, I would probably say we're into a journey of discovery of many possibilities that we might not even know what they are at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean Kamel. For the sake of time, I'll just go through the questions, and I'll start with the first question. I'm actually that could be directed to Tim, which talks about or addresses linking business continuity with accreditation. So the ability of an academic institution to continue, will that something that we'll see maybe part of accreditation standards, the ability to continue and to survive these form of shocks? Tim?
It's a great question, Ahmed. I'll be very brief. We just launched our 2020 standards this past fall. So they directly focus on a few unique issues. One is societal engagement, and the other is impact of scholarship. But the third is this area and hyper focus on the ability of schools to manage risk, to anticipate risk, and to navigate around it. And so embedded in these new standards is an expectation that a dean, Dean Kamel and team will present a plan that says we've anticipated scenarios that may be enormously disruptive to us, either in terms of financials or enrollment or socio-political or whatever it might be. And we do this with our members around the world. And how would they, in the case of this eventuality, respond to it? So yes, indeed, it's a really important component of the new standards. And I think it encourages deans and their teams to think creatively about ways to manage through these challenges and to be stronger and more agile moving forward.
Thank you very much, Tim. Another question on experimentation, and I think Jonathan mentioned something about experimentation with learning and teaching. And I'm sorry that you got disconnected, Jonathan. Can you please shed more light on that? I mean, and expand what does it mean by experimenting in this context?
Yes, thanks. Sorry about being cut off. Just so I came to my punchline, but now I won't go back to the joke. So there are a number of ways that we should be experimenting more. We're stuck with our business school disciplines or the social science disciplines in a way which is creaking at the edges. And I don't have great solutions to this, but I know that we should be throwing these boundaries aside for a while, try out different combinations of the way in which techniques, focus on sectors, methods of analysis get brought together in different ways. Right now, we separate quantitative analysis from other forms of analysis as if there's a great wall between them. We look at financing and financial analysis in a way that's very different from information analysis or manufacturing. Probably that's not going to stand up very much longer. We should be the experimenters. And as part of this, and as part of an attitude of tolerance of experimentation, we should be ensuring that our students are given a larger burden of the responsibility of interpreting these problems for themselves. We should educate them in critical thinking so that they don't go away believing that they've been given a recipe book that they can enter the job market and use immediately. Similarly, we have to educate employers to understand that we're trying to turn out people who have a lifetime's worth of foundation and a little bit of next year's practice, and not a full volume of next year's practice, much of which will be out of date in 3 years. The employers will hate us for it if we do that, but they should hate us if we just give them people who are so bound up in traditional learning practices that they're out of date. Then the employers complain that we don't supply them with well-taught people. So I think we need to deal with our ideas of experimentation in this sort of way. I don't think that the biggest problems we have are in delivery. I think we can play around with online delivery and multimedia and stuff like that. This has been going on, by the way. Let me remind you, the predecessors of MOOCs date back now 32 years, right? This is not something that dawned on us in March, right? We've got 32 years of experience with this and 60 years of the Open University. I would submit to you that the model that was developed in the Open University, an extraordinary experiment which proved many, many things correctly, that they tried, some failures, but the basic elements of that have barely changed with the contributions of new technologies. So I think we have to look back on what's risky, what's experimental, what's really new, and what's just superficial in terms of, a little bit more social media here, a little bit better use of email and drop boxes there.
Thank you much.
Can I tell a bit of the punchline?
Sure, of course.
You will be surprised to learn, and this is a distinct, I can't generalize this beyond LSE, but at LSE, the applications have gone up. The largest growth in applications is in our area. We only teach social sciences, but the area closest to the humanities, economic history, is the one that grew dramatically. The least, and this is, I can't explain this at all, the least is in health economics and health policy. And management, accounting, finance, organization studies have been in the middle of this growth, but all of us have grown. But the least is in health economics and policy. The most is in the closest we get to the humanities. Make of that what you will.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. One last question, and I'll actually address this to Deborah, based on the very interesting results of the survey. So you mentioned that there might be certain thoughts about the survival of certain institutions actually at the back of many minds. And as a faculty member, I always hear this from the students, is that what can you teach me that is not on YouTube or any other source? And this is something that has been going on. I mean, these traditional, what are the jobs that are going to disappear in the future? And as educators, how do you see this? Is AI, for example, or this very advanced technology, is this a threat for educators? Would it ever substitute the traditional faculty member or teacher?
Well, certainly in terms of the survey, and then the EFMD conference last week, which had a huge number of attendees and was remarkably optimistic, actually, in terms of the energy and enthusiasm of the deans that attended. I would say that that the disappearance of the academic and the disappearance of face-to-face contact isn't seen as something that's going to happen in the immediate future, but the sophistication of what we mean by remote learning and delivery is something that is likely to evolve. And I think it was interesting what Jonathan was saying about the hollowing out phenomenon may mean that there are new forms of remote learning that parts of the market become very adept at delivering, perhaps in collaboration with professional bodies and with other partners, leaving perhaps an elite group of business institutions who are currently enjoying huge numbers of applications for postgraduate courses and MBAs in particular, which don't seem to be showing any signs of slowing down. And then perhaps a middle ground that embraces a very different form of digital learning. I think one of the presenters at the conference last week described it as not so much focusing on developing a set of business management skills, so much less about skills acquisition for graduates, but really about changing their mindset and embracing rewiring finance on a global scale, embracing SDGs, and really looking at the planet as perhaps a focus for some of their aspirations. So less about skills acquisition, more about mindset, and more about synthesis and application, which I think, again, is something that Jonathan just alluded to, and not focusing on assessing students through recall and so on. I could talk about it for a long time, but we don't have a long time.
Thank
I'm
you.
going to stop there.
Thank you very much. I'm very cautious of our time, and I would like to really thank our panelists for an excellent session, and our participants for the questions and being here. And on behalf of the AUC School of Business, I look forward to seeing you all in future events. Thank you very much, and goodbye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Great job. Thank you so much.